Christian parenting.
Welcome to the Living Wholehearted podcast. We are Jeff and Tara Matson, a husband and wife team who is shrinking the integrity gap in our own lives and helping others do the same. I'm a leadership and organizational development coach, and Tara is a licensed marriage and family therapist.
We believe that if you have a following, you are a leader, and how you lead matters. Whether you are leading in the home, work, or community, we are bringing you biblical, clinical, and relational wisdom to help you in every relationship that matters most to you. None of us do this perfectly, but we are leaning into the reality of our humanity and profound wisdom of grace. Living wholehearted means that we bring all of who we are to God and others. Our minds, our emotions, our bodies, our relationships, and our stories. Our stories do not define us. God does. However, sometimes, a lot of the times, our journeys take us places that we never imagined. Today, we want to talk about one of those places, divorce. Divorce might feel like a normative term to you, because in fact, we live in an age where all of us know somebody who is either divorced or has parents who are divorced, and many have experienced the cost firsthand. Even though we live with the impact of divorce ourselves, Jeff and I, we believe in the redemption of what God can do in our stories. It's not a deal breaker for anyone. And though it's traumatic and has consequences that we can't control, it doesn't define us. And so we want to talk about that today with our guest, Tracie Miles. She's the author of Living Unbroken, Reclaiming Your Life and Your Heart After Divorce. Tracie's a speaker, author, director of the Compelled training with Proverbs 31 Ministries. She's written more than 4 bestsellers and contributed to reach millions of Christian women around the world. She has 3 children of her own, and she lives in Charlotte, North Carolina. Welcome, Tracie.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Well, first, I just want to say thank you for writing this powerful and important book. And we know that this is a hard topic to discuss. So start maybe just with a bit of your story and what led to you penning these words.
Okay. Well, I had been married 25 years, had just celebrated my 25th wedding anniversary with a trip out of town. And just a few months prior to that, had received a new 2-book contract with David C. Cook Publishers, who's my publisher. And within just a few months of our 25th wedding anniversary, I found out that my husband was kind of living a double life. There was some infidelity and some different addictions and behaviors and things that just completely destroyed the marriage. And although part of me wanted to reconcile and part of me was like, no, absolutely not. We can't recover from this. We spent many, many months trying to figure things out. But there did come a time where it became clear, just due to a lack of change of behaviors, that was not going to be possible for us. And so we did end up getting divorced. And it's been just over 5 years now since that all originally started. And over that past 5 years, somehow, by some grace of God, some miracle, which I don't even understand, I have written 3 books in that time period, which have been birthed out of this experience. And each one was written as I was walking out the different seasons of this journey. So it's just been amazing to see what God has done through such a painful, devastating, horrific experience, and just to see how he's worked in my heart and in my children and in my life. And now being able to use that pain for a purpose is very rewarding and kind of helps restore my joy even more.
Yeah. So the very common place where you're married for many, many, many years and then completely turned to left field, like you did not even expect going this direction. And so in those cases, it's so often a traumatic one, particularly even more so in the church. Can you talk a little bit about the unique struggles that you think women face in getting a divorce in the church versus outside the church?
Sure. Well, my family and I grew up going to church my whole entire life, and my kids were in church their whole entire life. Every time the door opened, it seemed like we were there. And My husband at the time was a deacon, and I served in women's ministry. I've been serving with Proverbs 31 for over 15 years and writing and speaking. And we've been in the same Sunday school class for 20 years at the same church. And when all of this happened, it was not only a personal blow and a devastating blow for our family, but, from a social and church and a community standpoint, it's very, very isolating. So I was, shame and guilt, even if it's not your fault, what's happened are really part of the journey that we have to all walk through. Those are seasons we have to walk through. And I certainly did that. And so I stopped going to church there because I really felt like, well, I can't go to Sunday school now because I can't go sit in the couples Sunday school class where I've sat for 20 years with my husband. And I don't want to go sit in the pew alone with my kids where I've sat for 20 years with my whole family and around everyone else that has their husbands, still there. And there just weren't any single classes. If they were people that were 30 years younger than me or 30 years older than me. And there just wasn't really a place for me. And I actually visited a lot of churches maybe a year later after I kind of felt like, okay, I'm ready to maybe put myself back out there. But even all the churches that I visited didn't really seem to have a place for me to plug in. And that was very disappointing for me.
Yeah, that's disappointing to me too. I'm not sure on the East Coast or in the South, sometimes it's a very different culture, but we have something called divorce care that is across the nation. But I think the church is trying to find a place, knowing that this is a need. And here you are, leaders in the church. We talk about this a lot on our podcast and in our book and in our ministry. We walk alongside that when we're not really doing our work, these consequences are pretty devastating. You mentioned shame and guilt. They're a part of the journey. Can you speak to that a little bit more and what you mean there?
Yeah, those are just emotions that, first of all, you're ashamed because why couldn't I keep my marriage together? Why was I not enough for my husband? Why do my children have to go through this? And what did I do wrong? And we tend to, regardless of the circumstances or whose fault it was, we're going to tend to beat ourselves up. And then we struggle with identity and all those types of things. And some guilt, did I do something wrong? Was I not a good enough housewife or lover or cook or mom or something? All of these lies that we tell ourselves are things that we have to struggle through, because part of going through separation and divorce is we kind of lose who we are. We forget that we're made in God's image. We forget that we're loved. We forget that we're valuable because we base our value maybe on what someone else says or what someone else did to us, as opposed to what God's word says about us and who we are. And not going to church and not having that place to go and really reinforce that every single week. And even when there are places, because there are divorce care groups in my area, and I actually did attend some of those classes, which were helpful to some degree. And Steve Grissom, the founder of Divorce Care, actually endorsed Living Unbroken, my book. So I'm really excited about that. But it was still hard for me because there were men and women in the group, and it's a lot of emotions that you are processing and displaying in front of other people, that you don't know. And so my heart wasn't quite ready for that at the time. I think I might have gone a little too early, but I'm super excited right now because I do have in the works to start a program like that through my publisher that I hope will get into churches next year. That will be like a Living Unbroken program, similar, probably not super similar to divorce care, but it will be a program for women that will be in churches, I hope, across the United States, with video programs and a leader's guide and a participant guide and the books. And so I'm really excited about that because that'll just be a new opportunity for churches to bring in a program to minister to women who are going through this.
That sounds amazing, Tracie. Talk to me a little bit, maybe speak. When do you think it's a good time? I probably have my own opinion too, but when do you think it's a good time to go to the divorce care? And then who would be a right fit for the Living Unbroken groups?
Well, everyone's so unique. Everybody's situation is unique. Everyone's personality is unique. Your marriages are unique. So I don't know that there's any good time. For me, I just felt like, okay, I'm getting divorced. Now I need to go to this class. And I needed community. I needed to be around people that understood what I was going through. But I was so broken and just so emotional and literally emotionally unstable that for me, it was hard to sit in the room because I could not keep my emotions in check. And so I came out feeling embarrassed, not because the program wasn't wonderful and the people weren't wonderful, but I felt like I'm just a wreck and I don't need to go be a wreck in front of other people. But I have other friends that I've known and other people that have been involved with me online and in focus groups and people that have shared with me about their experience. They have found it to be the most healing, wonderful place that they've been. So it just varies. You just have to try things, just try different things and see what helps you, heal the most. But with Living Unbroken, I hope that it's going to be a safe place for women to share and not feel like they're looked at all or feel ashamed of their emotions, and just be an open place for them.
Mm. Yeah, what I'm hearing might, just to explain, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but Living Unbroken might be more of that women only, a place to really process and grieve through a safety, where divorce care does a lot of educating, and it is co-ed in both cases. So those might be some distinct differences. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes. So divorce care is a wonderful program.
Yes,
So
it is.
I think that would probably be the distinct difference is it will be for women only. But there's a lot of men that are reading Living Unbroken right now because they're sending me emails and sharing with me online. And so that blesses my heart because the message itself can really apply to anyone. But the goal of the program is to give women a place that feel like I don't have a place in the church and I don't know where to go and I don't fit in and I need a community of women that understand me, that I can go get coffee with and we can talk about everything without any fear. And so I'm looking forward to seeing what God is going to do with that.
I love it. One of the key factors of any of us making it through anything traumatic is whether we have support on the other side. And so you're creating that sort of, I hear you, I see you, I'm with you in this journey. Talk a little bit more, Tracie, about how you went from being, I can't control my emotions and I'm so broken, to here where you are now and helping others. What were some of those key pieces that God brought you through in your healing journey?
Well, one of the things I talk about in the first few chapters of the book is just the 5 stages of grief. And I mentioned that the writing of those books was really part of my healing process. God used that to help me through the journey because I was constantly in his word and I was constantly having to focus on, transforming my thought patterns and my perspectives and constantly having to think of ways how to love my life and how to get outside of my desire to be isolated and stay depressed because I was writing to try to inspire other women to do the same thing. And so I was having to live out the message that I was actually writing. So I was writing from a place of suffering, but still having my own hope for overcoming those feelings. And so that helped me because writing is an outlet for me as an author. So, but just as I did some research and just studying those 5 stages of grief for Living Unbroken, it really brought to light everything that I had been through and what so many women go through, but we don't really put a label on it. We don't realize, okay, first we're in denial and shock, and then we are angry about what happened, and then we're going to bargain with God and our spouse and ourselves, and then we're going to be depressed, and then we're embarrassed because we're depressed because we're dealing with this shame and this guilt about what's happened, and now we're ashamed because we're depressed and emotionally unstable, and you finally get to that point, and it's a different time frame for everyone that we have to accept. Okay, this is where God has me. We can stay stuck in the past and stuck in this sorrow, or we can lean into our faith and lean into God's word and trust that he has our tomorrow in his hands and trust him for good things and believe the scriptures that say God has a good plan and a future and he's going to prosper you. And he has, he can turn your pain into purpose and turn beauty from ashes. We have to believe all those scriptures are meant for us and not just for everyone else, and trust him with all the little things like our fears and our financial concerns. And it's really a faith walk, and it's different for everyone.
You never expected to be here, Tracie. A little bit I'm hearing, and when I was walking through your book, and I'm very protective of our guests' kids, but would you just speak a little bit about your own grieving process, but how you also walk through that grief with your kids and the wisdom that you're wanting to pass on to others who are going through divorce?
Mm-hmm. Well, I kind of learned the hard way because I don't know that I was a role model for doing that because I was so devastated, which I don't think is abnormal. I think any woman going through it, that's a struggle. How do I balance my emotions and what's happened with my children's emotions? And my kids were older. My son was in high school and both of my daughters were in college, so they weren't little kids. But sometimes that's even harder because they understand life and they want to know the details and they want to know what happened and what's going on. And they deserve to know that because, they are young adults. And they're also my best friends. We've also always been very close and still are, thank goodness. And I'm very blessed with that. But I do remember one situation, and I share about this in the book, that I processed with them a lot because I didn't want to tell all of my friends all the gory details of everything that had happened, all the embarrassing things that I knew. I was afraid to talk to some of my family about it because it would upset them. So me and my children just processed a lot, and they were here every day, and they would see me just having emotional breakdowns over the next financial wave that came in and hit me out of the blue, which I didn't know how I was going to handle. And just all the fears and the depression and everything. So they were here being my support system. And I don't remember the conversation that we were having, but I remember one day my older daughter, I was telling her something and she said, "Mom, I just want you to remember that you're not the only one going through this." And I'm not proud to say that statement, but I think that some other women might be encouraged to hear that because we can get so caught up in, my husband did this to me or this situation happened and now I have to face all these problems and I'm the one having to handle everything. And we're so caught up with the fear and the hopelessness and the anger and just everything that we're dealing with that we forget to be gentle and think about how the others are feeling at times. But my heart was broken for my kids. And that was part of my heaviness, was so worried about how they were feeling and how it was going to scar them for life and how it was going to affect their future relationships. So her saying that kind of was like a slap in the face because I was thinking, but I care about your feelings almost more than mine. But I think my point is that I kind of leaned on them a little bit too much because it's kind of like getting hit by a freight train, but then you have to pick yourself up and not worry about your own injuries because you want to go tend to their injuries. And that's really hard to do. So it was eye-opening for me just to be more aware of, how I reacted in front of them and what I let them see and the things that I told them. They didn't need to know everything, every single little detail. So it was a learning process for all of us, how to walk through kind of the muck that we were walking through together.
It is. And you're speaking to, it's just messy. It's just messy all around. And it's really hard to do it, super well. Right. And I'm sure every story has those things where you look back and go, yeah, could have done that one different. But in terms of maybe some wisdom for those going in the middle of it, one of the things when I'm walking through a family who's devastated by divorce is making sure that each person in the family has a team. And so that the family isn't your team because everybody got hit by the freight train. And so they need, mentors, counselors, support groups, all the other pieces. And sometimes we try to become each other's support. So I appreciate you speaking to that, Tracie, and the temptation and the reality of how, normal that is, but to offer opportunities for our kids to have resources outside of us if we're going through that, because you got hit by a freight train and there's a lot to recover. So I'm glad to hear that, you've got 5 years behind you and you guys are still processing it. So the story's continuing. You talk a little bit more about acceptance in your book. And I'd love for you, as you're talking about grief and then moving towards acceptance, what is that? How do you get there?
Well, acceptance is definitely not just saying, okay, I'm over it, let's move on. It's certainly not that. Those 5 stages of grief, that's the 5th stage, is finally getting to the point to where you've processed enough, you've leaned on God enough, you've seen enough, but you are also at a place where You're tired of living in that limbo. You're tired of trying to hold on to what was and afraid to maybe grasp onto what is. And we just have to accept the fact that this is not the season that we wanted. This may not be the life that we wanted, but it is the life that we have. And we have one life to live. And that's what I started telling myself. And there are a couple experiences that I share in the book about how God gave me that revelation. But the end of my marriage was not the end of me. And the death of my union with my husband was not the death of my life altogether. I still had life to live. And I still had children and family and blessings and a future and a job and a ministry that I love. So there comes a time when we have to say, no, this isn't what I wanted for my life. And I wish God hadn't let that happen. But we have to trust in his plan and trust that he does have a good plan for us. And we can't move forward if we're still hanging on to what's in the past. So at some point we have to be willing to turn the page. And that's really what that acceptance is just saying, yeah, I wish this hadn't happened. I wish this wasn't my life. I wish things were different. However, they're not. So we have to come to that point to where we say, what's in my best interest is to let go of the past so I can embrace the future that God has, whatever it may be.
It's so powerful, that there's still more life to live. And yes, there's an incredible loss and there's healing that has to happen, but there's more. And sometimes we make our marriage our everything, and think life is over. I know this is a vulnerable question, but Tracie, you strike me as a person who can go there. You're part of Proverbs 31 Ministries.
Mm-hmm.
You've been doing that for years. I imagine you and Lisa Turkish are close. And I think for a lot of women, that comparison game is continuing, right? When you go, how come your marriage made it through that devastation of betrayal and mine didn't? Talk to that a bit, because that is a real struggle, even ongoing through divorce.
Right. That's definitely a struggle, because why would God heal one marriage if he doesn't heal another? And I don't have an answer for that. And that's something that we can't sit around and dwell on. And that goes back to really just trusting that every marriage is different, every spouse is different, every situation is different. And how you process things together are differently. It takes two people to want to have, reconciliation and to be able to work towards that. And God has different directions for all of our lives. And so what is the biggest blessing for one person as far as reconciling their marriage, that might not be the biggest blessing for someone else. I mean, there are many, many times that I have felt like this was the best path for me, was to not continue in that, because I feel like the problems that we had, the issues that were the underlying causes of our divorce are still ongoing to this day. And so I would still be dealing with those. And so that gives me a peace knowing that I feel like God released me from that pain and has opened doors for me to have other opportunities and, new blessings, and to just kind of start reinventing myself and a new life and just following his lead in a different direction. So I'm happy for everyone that can reconcile that, because God is the healer of all things, but it is his will to whether he's going to do that or not. We just have to trust, regardless of what he chooses for our life, that it's the right thing.
Yeah, you said something really important, that it takes two for reconciliation. And that's often the deciding factor in many situations, is if are both parties doing their piece towards reconciliation. And when there's only one party, that's kind of the decision that's being made. Talk a little bit about the moment when you knew this was the direction you had to go in terms of divorce. Was there a moment in time or a way that God helped you with the clarity? That's often a hard decision for women who love the Lord and really wanted to stay married. How did you decide in that moment?
Well, for me, I had, of course, been praying about it for months and trying for quite some time to figure out which direction to go, and knowing in my gut, maybe I should, not try to reconcile because I could see the continued issues. But in my heart, I want to keep my family together, and I really was holding on to this picture of the future that probably was not going to be my reality. And in the back of my mind, I really knew that. So I just kept praying that God would give me direction and confirmation of what I was supposed to do. And I finally prayed this prayer one morning, and I just pleaded with him to let me know what direction I should go in. I just couldn't keep living in this limbo with no contact for a year and no support, but I'm not divorced and I can't move on and I can't figure out what to do. It's just the worst place to be really is in limbo. I honestly believe that. But I just prayed this prayer, and then I remember getting my devotion out and reading it, and it was almost word for word the words that I had prayed that morning and an answer to that prayer. And it basically, in summary, just said, stop holding on to the past, release what you have been taken from, and trust me with your future. So it was almost kind of like just a light bulb went off, and it was as if God leaned down and said, I release you from this. You have biblical reasons. I support you. I love you. God doesn't hate people who are divorced. That's one of the biggest messages I try to get through in this book is, God hates divorce. Yes, it says so in Malachi 2:16, because he hates what divorce does to his people. But it never says he hates divorced people. So that's a stigma that we live with, which is a lie, is that God's going to hate me, or I can't serve in ministry, or I'm scorned because I'm separated or divorced. But no, he hates that for us because it causes suffering to men and women. And that's something that I really had to struggle through myself and learn from. But that morning, God just really gave me a peace that this is a direction that was just confirmation for me, personal confirmation, because it was almost word for word. It was as if I picked up the phone and I said, hey, God, what's the answer to this question? And he said all of those words. It was that clear. So I just started making strides on doing what I needed to do from that point forward.
That's powerful, because I hear you asked him, and holding tight to the truth that he loves you no matter what the decision or choice, and that he answered. And you could hear him, and he does that, and he's faithful too. And it isn't a clear 1, 2, 3 step for everybody. So you've got to have that intimate relationship with God and with your community. So the most common question I get in my office as people are working through divorce is when is it okay for me to start dating? And there's some things that I would say to that, but I want you to speak to that question, because it's a part of the divorce, remarriage kind of big question.
Mm-hmm.
Is it okay to start dating and getting married again?
Yeah. Well, I'm certainly not the dating expert, so let's preface what I'm going to say with that. But I know I can speak from my own experience, for anyone that was in a marriage for quite some time that seemed without love or without support, or if your spouse was unfaithful, which puts a divider between, your relationship. And then you go through this hurtful, terrible experience to where you feel so unloved and so unwanted and unvaluable. The first thing that you want to do is be loved. And that's exactly, I remember telling my ex-husband that, actually, admittedly, I'm like, I will find someone that's going to love me for me and that wants me. And I remember saying those words to him, and which were one of the very last things, because I was just so hurt. And I felt like I just wanted you to love me. And I think that's what every person who finds themselves separated in divorce, that's our heart's desire. And that's how God created us, to be loved, to be one with someone else. But I also think there's a time that we need to allow ourselves to heal. It might be 3 months, it might be 6 months, it might be 5 years. And in between that time, we are going to make some mistakes. And I certainly did. I share in the book several women who were vulnerable enough to share that they also made some mistakes, that they wish they hadn't jumped into it so fast. But out of every single one of those mistakes, we've all learned lessons, we've all grown. And so my biggest advice would be just to not jump right in unless you feel like it's the right time. That's why I said you can't speak for everyone, because everyone's different and your relationships are different. But probably waiting a little bit and giving your heart and your mind time to heal and process is never a bad idea.
Yeah, because what I hear you saying, I mean, we can be attracted and dive into a relationship to meet the need of being loved, or the wounds, trying to heal the wounds, versus healing and then going into a relationship out of that healing. And so you're saying, do the work, take the time needed to heal before, and that time frame can look different for many, but the grieving process does take time. There's a lot of steps that you walk through and are an important piece to hit. And maybe that's a good marker for people. Have I gone through that process?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So let's speak to the leaders and mentors that are walking alongside, maybe their children, those in their church that are walking alongside. Friends, speak to them. What would you want them to know about walking alongside someone going through a divorce?
One of the worst things about going through divorce is how alone you feel, because everyone is still a couple and you're not, or that's how it seems. Because usually when you're married, you typically hang out with people who are also married. So suddenly you're not married and you kind of find yourself alone. And that's very difficult. And one of the hardest things for me was I mentioned I had been going to the same church for over 20 years. And I was friends with all those people that were in my church and in my Sunday school. And they were such sweet, wonderful people. But I think they didn't know what to say. They didn't know how to deal with the situation. They didn't want to pick sides. So they just cut ties. And that's the most hurtful thing that you can do to either party, because there's no more time that someone needs just the support, just a quick text that says, thinking about you, hope you're doing okay. Let me take you to get some coffee, to talk about the weather. You don't have to talk about all your situation that might be awkward, but you just need people to be around you. And I actually had a friend that I've been friends with forever who the friendship became kind of clear at this moment. But she's like, yeah, I don't think I can hang out with you anymore because you're single. My husband doesn't want me hanging out with single people. And that was like a stab in the heart, because it's not my fault I'm single. And I'm still the same person and the same friend. And I would just caution people to be aware of not treating people that are getting separated or divorced, man or woman, that they're any different of a person than they were before. They're just now not with the person that they were with before, but they're still a person who has feelings and needs and a desire for the same friendship and community, that they had before.
That's a good word. Well, let's end with just one last piece of wisdom that you're sensing that person needs to hear who's going through a divorce or facing that decision. What do you sense that they need to hear today?
Just that they are not alone. And they are not crazy for feeling the way that they do. I've spent so many months thinking I am literally going crazy.
Mm-hmm.
I must be a crazy person. There is absolutely something wrong with me. I cannot get it together. I am a basket case. My whole life is going to fall apart. Everything is hopeless. And it's so natural to feel that way. But I would just encourage them that that's not true. I mean, bad things do happen. Things don't always go the way that we want, but there is a light at the end of the tunnel. We can trust God. He is the greatest provider. He's provided in miraculous ways for my family and so many others that I know. And there's so many women that are out there going through the same thing, but feeling alone and crazy. And so that's why I'm excited about just this book being out, not because I want my whole story spoken to the whole world. We'd rather keep our mess to ourselves, but I just pray that it will be an encouragement to other women and even men that read it, to know that they're not alone, they're not crazy, and that there is hope for a future, and that it can be very happy and very joyful, and that they've got a good future.
Well, I love this line on the back of the book. It says, your marriage may be broken, but you don't have to be. And that just your words today, Tracie, your book. How do people find you if they want to reach out or follow you?
Yeah, you can follow me on my blog at traciemiles.com, and it's Tracie with an IE. And I'm also on Facebook, the Tracie Miles author page, and I have a Love Life Again community. It's a private group, but anyone can join it. It's just a great group that offers inspiration and encouragement every day. And there's thousands of women and some men in there that support each other. They've been through all kinds of different circumstances. And I also am on Instagram and Twitter.
Wonderful. Okay, we'll put all that in the show notes as well if you didn't catch it. But thank you, Tracie, for joining us and just sharing your story and who you are and your wisdom today. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So maybe you're fearing going through a divorce yourself in your marriage, and you haven't been able to do the work yet to make that discernment, or maybe you're in the process or you're post You can go to livingwholehearted.com and find some resources there. We do have counselors that are willing to walk with you as well, where we do biblical, clinical, and just quality clinical care for where you're at and for you, for your kids. Also, if you go to our website and subscribe to our monthly newsletter, we're giving away our favorite books for the month. So we're giving away Tracie's book, Living Unbroken, this month. So if you want to be put in the drawing, whether it's for you or just having as a resource as a leader, I think you would definitely want to get this book. And you can enter our drawing, or you can go find it anywhere books are sold. And Jeff and I are going to be doing a little bit of a dialogue around the integration of trauma-informed theology and understanding where mental health and the Bible meet. It's one of our passions. So make sure you join us in the weeks ahead and subscribe to this podcast. Share this particular one if it spoke to you with Tracie Miles, with someone that you love and you care about. I bet it'll bring hope. And we thank you for helping us be a community where we're all shrinking the integrity gap between who we say we are and how we're actually living, and doing this rooted in grace.
This podcast is powered by Living Wholehearted, Courageous Girls, and the Christian Parenting Podcast Network. Thank you for joining us in this critical movement of shrinking our integrity gaps between what we preach and live.